The Red Sea is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. But now, Houthi fighters from Yemen are attacking vessels, forcing major companies to reroute operations. How will this impact global trade? And what can be done to secure the Red Sea? This is Inside Story. I'm Cyril Vanier. Welcome to the program. The ripple effect of Israel's war on Gaza is causing a maritime crisis in the Red Sea, one that may have major implications for the global economy and trade. Iranian-backed Houthis have been carrying out attacks on commercial vessels. The fighters say that they're targeting ships linked to Israel in protest against the war in Gaza. As a result, several major firms have suspended operations in the strategically important waterway. The United States has announced a coalition task force to respond to the attacks. But how effective will that be? And what impact will the disruptions have on the global economy? We'll discuss all this with our guests after this report by Victoria Gatenby.
Commercial ships under attack by Iranian-backed Houthi fighters in one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Since the war on Gaza started more than 2 months ago, Houthis have used missiles and drones to attack vessels they say are supplying Israel. At least 12 shipping companies, including Denmark's Maersk and oil giant BP, have suspended operations in the Red Sea because of safety concerns.
This is not an Israeli trade problem. This is a global trade problem. The attacks are very, very wide-ranging. They're taking in ships from all different types of flag and have potentially very, very serious consequences for seafarers from all around the world.
The conflict is centred around a crucial maritime corridor connecting Europe and the Mediterranean to Asia. 12% of global trade passes through it. Avoiding the Red Sea and taking a longer route around the southern tip of Africa increases travel time and drives up prices.
The costs of the fuel, the cost of increased insurance, and the fact that the ships and the containers are then out of place, this disruption just escalates. All of that means that the costs for consumers are going to increase.
In an effort to prevent further attacks, the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd announced the formation of a multinational naval task force to patrol the Red Sea during his visit to Israel on Monday.
These attacks are reckless, dangerous, and they violate international law. And so we're taking action to build an international coalition to address this threat. And I would remind you that this is not just a U.S. issue. This is an international problem, and it deserves an international response.
The Houthis accuse the coalition of militarizing the sea and say it will not stop their naval operations, which aim to support Palestinians in confronting Israeli aggression, all of which risks pushing the region into further turmoil. Victoria Gatenby for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests now. In Ottawa is Thomas Juneau, a non-resident fellow at the Sanaa Centre for Strategic Studies. In Brussels is James Moran, a former EU ambassador to Egypt, Jordan and Yemen. And in Plymouth is Stavros Karamperidis, a lecturer in maritime economics at the University of Plymouth and head of the Maritime Transport Research Group. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Stavros, first question goes to you. How much damage does this do to global trade?
Oh, okay. Straight to the not $1 million question, but the $1 billion question. First of all, thanks for having me, Paul. Here, it's a great honor to be. And as we were discussing earlier on, it's a great fact that we're trying to have that coverage to a very important topic for the global trade. It has a big damage. You know, if we go back nearly 2 years ago, as you may remember, for the blockage of the Suez Canal back in March 2021, from that area is on a daily basis, we have 9.5 billion of trade passing. So as you can imagine, that is causing a lot of impact to the overall trade, the global trade, and is also increasing the length of the journey. So it's approximately 10 extra days for vessels carrying the goods from Asia to Europe. And by that, we're having more costs in terms of the transportation of the goods. And of course, they're going to be more delayed. So as you can imagine, that has a huge knock-on effect to the overall supply chains.
Are you able to, so that our viewers can get a concrete sense of what this means for them, for the consumer? This means that you can have energy, consumer goods that are stuck on ships for an extra 2 weeks compared to what was scheduled. How much does that drive up the cost of everything that's on that ship, for instance?
It's kind of difficult to give you a number now because, it's like we have to see, first of all, how the freight rates are going to react. We've seen them increasing. We also seen the oil price getting a bit of increase because of that. I think if the overall situation escalates and continues like that, then we're going to see an increase in both in the oil and also because, as we know, nearly 50% of the operational expenditure of the vessels is oil. So if the oil goes up, the freight rates will go up by definition. And we also have to add on top the extra voyage time. So that means that the overall transportation of the goods is going to be more lengthy and more delayed, depending, of course, on the various sectors. So, for instance, if we're talking about containers, that is going to increase another 10 days, as we said earlier on. But the good news is that we're ending the Christmas season, so it's going to be capacity in the system. On the other side, I think for tankers, that's not going to be the case because tankers were already loaded, and that's going to push faster the increase in the freight rates for oil. So, we have to see it on specific segments, and I cannot give you an aggregate number, but definitely we're going to see an increase.
About the timing of this, when would we expect to actually see the difference in prices? You said because this is the Christmas season, there's capacity in the markets. Does that mean that in January, or would it be February when you start seeing the price increase really hit consumers?
To be frank, you have to consider that if we're talking about containers at the moment, that means that, the goods that we have ordered for Christmas, they have been already delivered. It's the 19th of December. It's a couple of days before Christmas, so everything is kind of been delivered. So we're heading towards the quiet season. January and February is the quiet season. So that means there is capacity in the container sector to absorb any kind of extra need. Of course, after, we have to think in a lead time. When you're placing an order, it takes nearly 35 days to come from Asia to Europe. So we have to consider that when the trade is going to recover after the Chinese New Year, when it's going to be around end of February and things like that, then the trade is start picking up again. And that means that the orders we're going to place late January, that is going to have a knock-on effect in container shipping. The one we're going to see more obvious. Of course, we're going to see a small increase in the overall freight rate because of the additional costs that, as I said, for the traveling for the transportation of the goods. But I think after February, March, we're going to see a bigger effect if the overall situation continues, which I hope it wouldn't.
Okay, I'm with you. And that's really interesting. And it's an interesting reminder that due to the nature of how this works, there is, by definition, a lag in between the time when there's a disruption in the supply chain, such as what we're seeing now in the southern Red Sea, and the moment when the end consumers will actually feel it. That is good to know at the outset of this conversation. Thomas, what is the end game for the Houthis here? I'm getting all the big questions out of the way at the top of the show.
That's a difficult question to answer also because the Houthis are not very transparent. We don't know exactly what it is they're trying to do. But generally speaking, we can say that there's a number of objectives that they have. One of them has got to be domestic. And in media conversations, we focus a lot on the regional or strategic dimension, but there's also a domestic dimension. The Houthis have de facto won the civil war in Yemen, not completely, but in practice they have. They are now the de facto governing authority in the capital in the northwest. They control something like 60% of the population. They've won. Now they are trying to move into a bit of a post-war phase. They are in discussions with Saudi Arabia to formalize the Saudi withdrawal. That post-war phase will be challenging for the Houthis. The economy is a mess. The Houthis have shown to be abysmal managers of the economy. So one aspect here that we do have to keep in mind is that they're probably trying to mobilize pro-Palestinian feeling within the Yemeni population that is under their control, but also in parts of the country that they don't control. That has to be an objective. But beyond the domestic element, there's also significantly a regional element. Having won the civil war in Yemen, the Houthis feel very much emboldened, and they want to establish themselves as a regional power. And we see that in their relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We see that in them sending missiles and drone attacks on Israel and also now on the Red Sea. So ultimately, I think we have to combine both the regional and the domestic element.
Okay, we're going to dig into that with James. And by the way, in this conversation, we're going to ping pong, obviously, between the effects on trade and the regional implications, because obviously these two are connected. It's the Houthis' ability to strangle the trade in the Red Sea, which is such an important waterway, as we laid out at the top of the show, which gives them this importance regionally and which could have regional consequences. And that, James, is my question to you. With this US-led coalition now in the Red Sea, it already was, the U.S. Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain, so they were around there. But are we moving now closer to a regional war?
I'm not sure about that, but okay. I think we'll have to watch it very carefully in the months to come. But this international maritime cooperation is interesting. It's not the first time we've seen it in the Gulf of Aden. In the past, of course, we had the operations against Somali pirates, which turned out to be successful in the end. There was the European Operation Atalanta. The Chinese joined in a pretty significant way. And I suspect and I hear that outreach at the moment is going to not only European countries and Gulf countries, but also to China, which has a big interest in calming down things in the Red Sea, given the enormous trade that flows through there to European markets and vice versa. So the strong interest coming from a lot of different parts of the area. Should also mention Egypt, of course, which is risks losing major, much-needed foreign exchange revenues from the Suez Canal, so long as ships are being sent around the Cape of Good Hope. So a coalition of interest here is pretty strong against the actions that the Houthis have taken. The exception, of course, is Iran. Iran being a big supporter of the Houthis, the main arms supplier to the Houthis, and also with an interest probably in spurring destabilization in the region, given its position vis-à-vis Israel and so on. But the overwhelming interest seems to me to be a common one, and I think we're going to see quite a lot of action there, not just from the West, but also maybe from the Asian side too.
You mentioned Iran. What is the level of involvement that they have in Houthi operations, specifically in the Houthis, putting so much military pressure on this shipping lane?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been an important factor militarily, but we shouldn't imagine the Houthis are the creatures of Iran. The Houthis have their own agenda for reasons also well laid out by your previous speaker there domestically. They're very keen to consolidate their position with the population at home, and whatever that takes. And the Iranians are in an alliance with them. Yes, there is the Shia connection between the two, although they're very different branches of the Shia Muslim faith. So that shouldn't be overdone either. So yes, I mean, there is a common interest with Iran, but Iran doesn't necessarily control what the Houthis do.
Okay. You say there's a convergence of interest. This next question goes to Stavros. If there's a convergence of interest, so many people, and this makes intuitive sense, so many countries have an interest in this waterway remaining safe and shielded from Houthi attacks. And that's why the U.S. has set up this multinational force. Is it possible to shield, given that there are 20,000 ships that pass through this naval corridor every year, is it possible to shield them from Houthi attacks with the coalition as it's been set up?
That's an operational question for the military people, and to be honest, I'm not having that kind of background, but I'll try to answer from previous experience, as James, I think, mentioned earlier on.
We did learn some lessons on that from the anti-piracy efforts, though.
Exactly, that's where I was going. We had the operation, the NATO SEALs down there when they managed to tackle the piracy in Somalia. And it was a very successful operation, I have to say. And I think that's a lesson that we can get from the overall operation. That's like, if the countries come together and they have a common target, they can achieve that. So I don't know how operationally Houthis or the Yemenis are and how capable they are. But I'm thinking that if, countries like the US, the UK, Spain, and also China, as we heard earlier on, that has joined in the past that kind of attempt, and, Chinese government has mentioned several times that it's on its interest to maintain all the arteries open for global trade because, as we know, China has the nickname of the global factory. So they really want to be able to send all their goods around the globe. So I think it's in the interest of most of the countries around the globe. So that's why they're going to put a lot of effort, I think, to maintain the artery open. And, we have also to consider in the equation that Panama Canal has a lot of issues at the moment because of the global warming, and a lot of goods cannot be shipped from that route. So that is also increasing further the importance of the Suez Canal and the transportation of the goods through the Suez Canal.
Thomas, your view on this, is this operation doable? Is it possible with a few, well, no, not just a few, with U.S. naval assets, French naval assets? There are 10 countries in this coalition. Is this possible to essentially make this waterway safe enough for all those ships to decide to reroute their traffic through there, given that more than 12 companies so far have said we're not sailing through this waterway anymore?
It's going to be very difficult, and part of the answer to that question is going to depend on what are the rules of engagement, which are still not completely clear. A lot of detail is yet to be announced. Is it going to be purely defensive, or are American assets in the region, ships in the Red Sea, going to retaliate against Houthi assets, against Houthi surveillance, radar, missile launch, Houthi port installations on the Red Sea coast? We don't really know that yet. The Americans have been cautious in not committing to directly hit Houthi assets. That would be complicated. The Houthis feel very emboldened right now. They feel borderline hubristic, I think, because they do perceive that they are unchallenged inside Yemen, which is probably an accurate assessment. They have been able to push back against Saudi Arabia. Now they are negotiating with Saudi Arabia's withdrawal from Yemen. It's not a peace process, right? It's a negotiation of the Houthi victory. So right now, the Houthis feel that they really have the bigger end of the stick. So can a maritime mission in the Red Sea help to protect some of the ships by air defense mechanisms and so on? Yes, but will it be enough to convince, as you said, the many companies that are, as we speak, more and more of them announcing that they will not transit through the Red Sea? That's difficult, and as of now, I'm not convinced that it's going to fully work. I certainly hope so, but it's going to be a major challenge.
And by the way, something, and again, this question is operational in nature. Thomas, if you want to address it, go ahead. James, if you have thoughts as well, go ahead. And if this is a detail, then we can move on. But the Western countries, specifically France, has mentioned, look, they are sending, they meaning the Houthis, they're using Shahed drones, which cost about $20,000, $30,000. They're very cheap. And we're shooting them down with missiles that are worth about €1 million. So this raises question of whether this Western coalition is sustainable as it's presently constructed. The way in which these Western countries intend to protect this waterway, if they're hemorrhaging millions of dollars of euros in missiles, when Yemen will be able to launch these really inexpensive drones, is that something that the Western countries can sustain? Perhaps James.
Yeah, it's interesting to think back a few years to Operation Atalanta. It was a different schema. In the end, it was successful not only because of countering the attacks by the Somali pirate boats, the skips that came in and threatened the container and oil traffic going through, but also because it was decided to hit the pirate installations on the Somali coast. It took a long time for that operation to happen, but when it did, it was probably the major factor in stopping the piracy coming out of Somalia. In a different context here, but nevertheless, I think probably the same sort of inflection point is probably going to be reached at some juncture when any international maritime protection force is going to have to decide whether or not it takes on the missile launching sites on land of the Houthis. Of course, should that happen, there are dangers there because you risk getting involved in the Yemeni, what's left of the Yemeni civil war. Now, the Houthis may have won for the moment, but they haven't yet consolidated their position. And there is a danger they're getting dragged into yet another civil conflict within Yemen. So this is a very difficult thing to achieve, and I suspect there'll be a lot of head-scratching in military planning places in Washington and elsewhere as to when and if that should happen. In other words, attacks on land against the Houthis if they continue with their current policy. However, Let's not forget, at the end of the day, the Houthis justify all of this because they want to support the Palestinian cause. Anybody that's been to Yemen knows just how strong the feelings are about that. If the Gaza war comes to an end, that also may have an effect on the Houthi strategy.
You raise a very interesting point there. You raise a very interesting point, which is, as you say, that the Houthis are doing this in the name, in support officially of Palestinians in Gaza. Do you think that what they're doing in the Red Sea right now, by putting this military pressure on this waterway, do you think that can actually move the needle in the Israel-Gaza war? It hasn't so far.
I doubt it, frankly. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be a major factor in changing the positions of the principal players, certainly not the Israelis, and I doubt the Americans in that war. So I don't think there will be a direct effect on that. That will depend on other things. But should the Gaza war come to an end, should we move on to the next stage, whatever that may be, then the Houthis may well dial down their actions, because they're kind of left high and dry, so to speak, in terms of what they're trying to do.
Stavros, what would it take for the major shipping companies to give the green light to go back through the Red Sea? Because at least 12 of them, as of the time of recording of this show, have pulled out of this route and they're rerouting. What would it take? Is there a benchmark where they say, for them it's a business decision, right? They need to make sure it's safe enough to be able to send all their goods.
Correct. And you said exactly what is all about, what is driving the decision. It's businesses, and also they have to balance between risk and profitability. So they have to find out, is it worth it to pass through the Red Sea at the moment? Or should they be more secure and spend a bit of more time, stretch a bit of more of my assets and my capabilities so I can have a safe passage and navigation? And I think that's a question that each individual company has to take, because, as you know, each company has different business strategies and different business cultures. So based on their own ideas and beliefs, they're going to move forward.
Thomas, as you watch all of this unfold, we're at what may be an inflection point here, right? The U.S. is just bringing together this international coalition to try and secure this waterway. As you watch this unfold, we don't know yet exactly where this goes, how this ends. What are you going to be watching out for? What signals are you interested in?
I will be watching for the rules of engagement in more detail, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, for the coalition and what that implies for possible retaliation directly against Houthi assets inside Yemen. It's not clear to me if the U.S. wants to do that for fear of escalation in the Red Sea and beyond with the Houthis, and perhaps with other armed groups that Iran backs throughout the region, but also for fear of Houthi retaliation. I mean, right now, there's a very delicate balancing act that is being played in those political talks between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. They have been going on for a long time now, more than a year. There have been rumors of an imminent deal between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis for a long time now. It keeps on getting pushed back. One of the reasons why it keeps on getting pushed back is that the Houthis, again, perceive that they have the big end of the stick and that they are consistently asking for more, trying to extract more concessions for Saudi Arabia. So this might also be part of the Houthi calculus here, to try to extract more concessions, to legitimate, to consolidate, and to institutionalize their domination of what they want to be now a phase of post-war Yemen. So if the U.S. retaliates and hits Houthi assets, radar sites, surveillance sites, port installations on the Red Sea coast, that may be, in a way, the best way to establish in narrow terms a deterrence in the Red Sea, which is probably necessary to reopen it to shipping. But the risk in doing that is that the Houthis would retaliate, not necessarily only against the U.S., but possibly also against Saudi Arabia or the UAE or other countries in the region, which would throw off potentially other political dynamics at play, notably those Saudi Houthi talks. So this is a very difficult equation for the U.S. to try to figure out, to try to strike the right balance. Because actions that may be necessary on one front may cause damage on another front. So I'm not sure what the right way out for the U.S. is here.
James, if we gameplay this, what do you think are the realistic scenarios? I mean, one that we've kind of put out there is, well, perhaps this multinational naval force actually neutralizes the Houthi threat to this waterway. I suppose that's one positive scenario. What do you think are the other realistic ones?
I think there's a fair chance that the deterrent effect of that multinational force, particularly if it's not just Western countries, but if the Gulf, I think the Gulf probably would be very supportive. Whether it will join in materially, I don't know.
They haven't
China,
yet, except for Bahrain. Bahrain's the only Arab country in this 10-nation coalition. They haven't yet, except for Bahrain,
and you would have expected that, given this the base of the US fleet. But also important, as I said before, is China, and to some extent Japan and some of the Asian countries. If they join in too, I think that would be pose a massive deterrent, not only to the Houthis, but also to the Iranians. Don't forget the Iranian relationship with China plays in the background here as well. And it might just be successful without having to launch major attacks on the mainland of Yemen. Certainly one would hope for that. Realistic, perhaps, but maybe one's hoping for too much here. But there is this danger that if the multinational force, whatever it's called, does get dragged into further civil conflict on the Arabian Peninsula, that could be pretty dangerous for all people, all concerned. And we shouldn't exclude that.
And we don't have much time left in the show, but can I get you to address quickly something that Thomas has said several times, that the Houthis may have an eye not just on the Israel-Gaza war, but also on their peace deal that they're currently negotiating with the Saudis, and this may help them put pressure on the Saudis. Your views on that?
I think up to a point that might work, but I'm not sure it'll make their situation that much better. There is a bit of hubris. Somebody mentioned hubris earlier amongst the Houthis at the moment. There is a danger that they're overreaching here. They have a strong interest to calm things down with Saudi Arabia. They don't want to get back into the sort of situation they were in 3 or 4 years ago. And if they do, their own position domestically will be tremendously weakened. It is not that Saudi Arabia necessarily will re-enter a civil war in Yemen, but they have to be very careful about that in what they're calculating. So I think so far, but no further, perhaps could be the principle here if the Houthis are trying to do that vis-a-vis leverage on the Saudis.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. That completes the regional picture of this conversation. Thank you so much to all of you gentlemen. Thomas Juneau, James Moran, Stavros, Karamperidis, thank you for joining us today and for taking the time. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. @AJ Inside Story is our handle. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha. Bye for now.